listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here through technological wizardry with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. We're hunkered down riding out this pandemic, but that won't stop us from going against the grain. That's how committed we are to the cause. The world is ending, and our little engine that could is still doing the news. We have another great show for you today. California is shut down. The famed Times Square in New York looks like a ghost town. Unemployment claims are skyrocketing. The ongoing story for the next several weeks, perhaps even months, will be the prolonged assault of the coronavirus on all notions of normality. In the first hour, we're going to discuss the attempted cash grab of various industries and as they teeter on the brink of collapse, and the government's plans to destroy habeas corpus under the guise of combating the COVID-19 virus. We can totally trust the government to only use the new extra constitutional powers for the best of reasons. That, of course, is sarcasm if you can't necessarily see the pronounced scowl on my face. In the second hour, we're going to get into some national politics. This election is still rolling along. In some ways, the discussion around the election has been somewhat muted, but this is purely surface. We're going to get into and explore this rather fascinating intersection between Trump's response to the pandemic and the public's perception of that response, especially in the context of trying to get reelected. I've done at least one monologue about Trump's botched response to this national emergency, yet that's not necessarily translating into Trump's polling. In fact, the opposite is true, with polling on Trump's response improving significantly. If Joe Biden is to win this race, it will be through poor handling of the COVID-19 emergency. If Trump seems presidential in handling it, Biden's task is going to look that much more impossible. Think back to Obama and the hurricane of 2012. So we're going to delve into that. Later in the second hour, we're going to discuss the chaos occurring in Europe as it struggles to meet the demands of the COVID-19 pandemic. The stories coming out of Italy, Spain, and the UK are heartbreaking, with triage decisions being made to not give ventilation or certain medical help to people based on age range in favor of the youth. Again, it's a triage emergency situation. Today is Monday, so be sure to stay tuned for Mr. Press segment. This is our weekly segment where we lampoon the Sunday's talking heads. But first, I suppose it's imperative to start here. Where in the Sam Hill is that lying dog-faced pony soldier, Joe Biden? This is some malarkey. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Nothing like this has ever happened in my 42 years on this planet. By all rational accounts, this is an emergency. Governor Newsom in California has called for a statewide shutdown, predicting more than half of the state will contract a disease that has a 1% to 3% kill rate. Estimates are for New York to hit its hospital capacity by the end of the month if rates remain unabated, rates of infection, that is. We have insufficient test kits, masks, ventilators, medicines, hospital beds, and that's after we pay 2 to 4 times more than anyone else in the world for their health care. Unemployment estimates are projected to go from estimated 280,000 to 3 million by next week. This is in the context of a country with little to no safety net. This is in the context of a country where the overwhelming majority of the people in the country don't have $500 for an emergency, where most of them are not guaranteed sick leave, and yet what it looks like, a large share of the country is going to be stuck at home with the inability to work. Now, Sanders, in this case, has been showing leadership, raising $2 million related to issues concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. He's also been having these kind of FDR-inspired fireside chats, and he's been addressing the nation near daily in items like this. Let's take a listen to this clip with Sanders addressing the nation.
Today, in America, unemployment offices are being flooded with applications from workers who have lost their jobs. The Secretary of Treasury recently said that unemployment in America may go as high as 20%. So all across this country, we have a situation where half of our people live in paycheck to paycheck. Under good times, they are struggling economically. We have a situation where 40% of the families in America cannot afford a $400 emergency. For 40% of the families, if their car breaks down, they're going to have to figure out how they get the money to repair their car. In other words, many of our people are already living in dire economic straits. And now, for many of them, they've lost their jobs. Their paychecks are stopping. So what we have got to do is to make certain that every single American receives the financial assistance they need to survive this crisis with dignity. Let me repeat that. A basic underlying principle of what we must do in Congress right now is to make certain that every American receives the financial assistance they need to survive this crisis with dignity. Those are people who have jobs today. Those are people who are unemployed. Those are senior citizens living on Social Security. Those are the homeless. Those are people who are in jail.
That's what I expect from the person on the left leading on an issue like this. We have severe problems in this country just in the normal way that we operate this country. People are pushed to the wall in our normal way of operation. I hope you understand what that means. Even in the best of times, most people in this country struggle. Most people in this country have difficulty covering medical bills or school loans and all of these things, all of the expenses. And this is not the best of times. This is, again, one of the worst. Even Trump, who initially went with this notion that it's not a big deal. Some people have been going to work with the virus. It's not that big of a deal. Even he has changed his tenor on this and have outflanked the Democrats in some respects in his tenor towards this. It's still Trump, however, so this is still like idiocy part two. But at the very least, he has been showing his face nearly every day talking about it. Let's listen to Trump being Trump, attacking one of the reporters for asking Trump an extremely rational question on whether or not Americans should be concerned about the response. Let's hear the clip.
Dead. What do you say the Americans who are scared, though? I guess nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witnessed, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead. I think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism, and the same with NBC and Comcast.
So
I don't call it Comcast. I call it Concast. Let me just for whom you work. Let me just tell you something. That's really bad reporting. And you ought to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism. Let's see if it works. It might and it might not. I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot. Let's see what happens, John.
Can I get back to the science and the logistics
You're
here?
That's hilarious. You're a terrible reporter. You're a terrible reporter. Hey, Mr. President, how should the American public, who's probably massively freaked out by what's going on right now? I mean, you have states that are shutting down. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the materials. We don't have the medicines. We don't have any of these things. We've paid all this money for health care, and we're massively inadequate. You knew this was coming for 2 months. I mean, what should they think? You're a terrible reporter. You're a terrible reporter. There are a litany of these clips. But again, he has been showing his face. He's been talking about this, and his polling has significantly gone up as a result of such. Where is Joe Biden? Joe Biden is supposed to be the person who the Democratic Party is choosing at this point. Joe Biden is supposed to be the person where they're literally talking about, hey, let's shut this process down and let's just get our guy in there. This is the guy that's supposed to be more electable. This is the guy that's supposed to be able to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. I'm going to beat him like a drum. He can't even show his face. They are absolutely concerned that Joe Biden is going to put his foot in his mouth or embarrass himself. That's the issue here. That's why Joe Biden hasn't shown himself. Joe Biden, the last video I've seen of Joe Biden was about a week ago, and he was looking into the camera. His wife has to come in to rescue him because he's just staring there with this kind of dazed look in his eye. His wife eventually leaves. I keep saying his wife doesn't love him because a woman who loves their husband doesn't have their husband out there looking like that. And Joe Biden just stares into a camera for another 3 or 4 seconds before finally wandering off. This is the man who's supposed to be there to deal with emergencies. This is exactly the problem with Blue no matter who. This is exactly the problem with no accountability, giving Democrats a pass for all of this time. So much so that now the guy who's there trying to put in the middle of a national emergency can't deal with the low bar of just going out and coherently making a pitch and making an explanation in regards to this particular virus. This is abominable. The notion that you're in the middle of a crisis and the person who's supposed to be leading the Democratic Party is nowhere to be found. They are burying and hiding him so he just doesn't embarrass himself. Again, if the person can't do this in the middle of a national crisis when they are running for office, then why on earth should anybody put them in that office? Bob, this is the problem with Blue no matter who. This is the problem with arguments about electability. All of these people who thought Joe Biden was more electable also thought Al Gore, John Kerry, and Hillary Clinton were also that much more electable. And all of those people ended up being wrong. Joe Biden clearly has mental deficiencies, clearly has issues even standing up for 2 hours and being coherent in regards to making a pitch. You had one case where Biden had been gone for like a month. He comes back, gives a 7-minute speech, badly worded, breathless, barely getting out a cohesive statement. I mean, and they look at this and be like, yeah, but the problem here is that we got to get rid of Trump. No, the problem here is that you're willing to put this guy in office with the notion that, okay, he's going to get Trump out, missing the point that the guy seems to be incompetent and can't meet the low bar of just dealing with the public. And you know, what am I missing here, Bob? I find this to be utterly astonishing that this is the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing right now because I'm seeing online right now the mayor of Washington, D.C., an establishment Democrat, it doesn't even matter her name. I mean, this is the Democratic Party. This is somebody that Obama endorsed and Clinton endorsed and all these different people. Obama did it, I guess, at the end of his term did. But right now on her Facebook page is her staff at a restaurant with the owners of that restaurant sitting together, all eating a meal together. What? Like, this is in the state of a pandemic when we're supposed to be doing social distancing, and these people are sitting together eating a meal, and that's like the public message. I don't think these officials have any idea what it's like to be actually in communities, what it's like to actually deal with people and talk to people and live with people. I mean, Hillary Clinton famously now lost that election because she did not go to Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, all of these places. This party is just drastically out of touch with the American people. And so, yeah, when you see this, like, oh, yeah, we'll just have Joe Biden do live feeds from the stateroom at his mansion that he's hiding out in right now. That's totally fine. Like, that's what the American people want. What do we owe them, Jamarl? I mean, that's what they have to be thinking. What do we possibly owe these people? The states are dealing with it. They're dealing with it. Who are we to offer them anything we have? We're fine. We're dealing with it ourselves. And so for me, it just ends up kind of being these, like, aristocrat oligarchs from their towers looking down on the masses of poor, sick people who are dying right now and saying, well, that's not our problem. We're up here to manage everything. Without us, they wouldn't even have a country. So they should be lucky that they're dying at the rates they are, because it could be so much worse without us. I mean, it has to be. It sounds very harsh to say that, Jamarl, but at this point, it has to be. I mean, these people are taking money from billionaires that are destroying the planet and led to this crisis. And now they're going to give them more and more money. For me, it speaks to the volumes of how out of touch the elected officials in this country are from the people that are actually within it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is out of touch. I mean, I always make this argument that, no person is a billionaire without either somebody working at their stores or buying their products, meaning they don't exist without us, without the population itself. And yet, for whatever reason, the population has bought into this notion that these guys are required to have that much cash. And somehow, it's as if this is some kind of act of God. We're in the middle of a pandemic where those businesses are going bust. And instead of let's try to make the society whole, you still have this weird ideological quirk where their thought is we need to protect the oligarchs. It's so bizarre. I don't know why the public is on board for this.
And if you had a society oriented around aid and the well-being of the masses, our economy should actually be working better than ever right now. This is what the economy should be prepared to ramp up and support. This shows you that this economy is simply based on profits and making money and not the well-being of people, because if it was based on the well-being of people, the economy would be flourishing right now. Jamarl, a lot to unfold over the next few hours. We have stay-in-place orders. We have the Department of Justice suspending habeas corpus. We have banks robbing us in front of our eyes during the crisis. And we have our weekly Miss the Press segment later at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. A lot to cover. Please stay with us. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this short break.
Tune in every Monday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for our regular segment, Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers, where we take a look at the state of education across the country. What's happening in our schools, colleges, and universities, and what impact does it have on the world around us? Our resident expert is Bill Ayers, the legendary activist, educator, and author. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Monday and every Monday for Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We've been talking about Joe Biden's Disappearing Act, but let's talk about some Democrats who are actually showing some backbone. Or at the very least, are they just obstructing? It depends on who you want to funnel a bunch of money to, I suppose. On Sunday, the U.S. Senate failed to advance the more than $1 trillion corona relief package. Democrats refused to vote to advance the bill, saying it gave too much with too few strings attached to business interests and ignored the needs of hospitals, frontline workers, and individuals. They're right, of course. In the midst of the unprecedented national crisis, Republicans can't seriously expect us to tell people in our communities who are suffering that we shortchanged hospitals, students, workers, and small businesses, but gave big corporations hundreds of billions of dollars and a secretive slush fund, says Democratic Senator Patty Murray of Washington. A Forbes breakdown of the bill notes that the relief checks to individuals will be led by income levels, as well as people who are working or getting Social Security or pension payments. The people it will reach must all be in the system, which makes sense, but obviously leaves out those among us who survive by working on the fringes for one reason or another. The bill would allow checks up to $1,200 per adult or $2,400 for married couples filing jointly, as well as $500 per child. All taxpayers must provide a Social Security number or adoption taxpayer identification number. And here's where things get tricky. Taxpayers must typically be working or receiving Social Security or pension income to qualify, since the amounts are tied to tax returns. The amount of checks would start to phase out for those earning more than $75,000, $150,000 for a joint return, and would disappear entirely for those earning more than $99,000 a year. Those families at the bottom, those with no federal income tax liability, will receive less money, but no less than $600. That's some help, right? 600 whole bucks. We're joined by Christine Hendricks, president of the University City School Board, Junior Bayard Rustin Fellow with the Fellowship for Reconciliation and contributor to the Truth-Telling Project, We Stay Woke podcast. I love that name, We Stay Woke. Christine, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So, Senate Mitch McConnell went after Democrats for obstruction and for not voting to move the bill forward, saying that they were fiddling with the emotions of the American people, fiddling with the markets, fiddling with our health care by standing their ground. You know, this the saying, fiddling while Rome burned. And I want everybody to fully understand, if we weren't able to act by Monday, it'll be because of our colleagues on the other side continuing to bicker when the country expects us to come together and address the problem. Is this obstruction, or were Democrats right to block this vote? Meaning, what are the chances of getting meaningful relief? But it's one of those things, I guess I'm asking this. Was it right for Democrats to stand their ground and saying, no, this gives too much to corporations? I laugh slightly at this only because when the tax relief was being put out from Obama, they didn't have any restraints on those items for Wall Street, the money that was being dumped into Wall Street. Those companies could give themselves bonuses. They could do whatever they wanted with the money. They didn't even have to be forced to loan the money. So it's funny to me that Democrats are now making this argument that, hey, there are not enough strings attached to this. But fair enough. Is this a bill that the Democrats should have blocked, or should they have let this bill go through?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I really don't know. I mean, I don't want to see companies be able to, buy back their stocks and be able to pay their presidents lots of money when they decide to leave after doing a horrible, horrible job. So I think that, maybe they learned something from 2008 and they don't want to have that same thing go on again. Maybe they are being a little obstructionist just because they feel, they can use this politically against Trump in the future. But, I mean, honestly, I think that the cleaner the bill is, and the more that it gives to American families. And I think that we cannot give people who are at the bottom the least amount of help. $600 is not going to pay anyone's rent. It's not going to put food on the table for anyone's children. So I think that, we do have to have a smarter bill that gives more to working class and lower class folks.
I agree with that. I mean, it's regressive. One of the main problems that we're having right now has to do with getting money to people at the bottom of the income scale, because those people either aren't working, they're being laid off, they don't have guaranteed sick leave where they'll get paid, meaning even if the job says, yeah, you can stay at home if you don't want to get ill. However, you're not going to get paid if you stay at home, which is all the incentives in the world for that person to go into work. I mean, the issue has more to do with we need money into the hands of the various people at the bottom of the income scale, because those people will dump that money directly into the economy. So I don't begrudge Democrats for holding the line on this, because I agree with you. I mean, one of the big hit points that they took in, I think it was like 2008, 2009, had to do with, I can't believe you didn't have any strings attached to this particular currency. So let me ask you this. What would make you comfortable in regards to passing legislation like this if we were indeed going to save these industries? Because I have my own idea for this, and I'm even curious what Bob thinks about this. Like, I would prefer them to say, if you want the cash, fine, you can get the cash. However, we're going to reorganize your companies. For the longest time, these places would make the argument that, well, I did this all on my own. Well, now you're coming out with your hat in your hand begging the public for cash. And if indeed you're begging the public for cash in order to save your business, the public should get some say-so in the way that business gets reorganized. That's my opinion. What's yours? What do you think about that?
I thought one of the things about this was that we weren't giving businesses this cash, that it's only going to be a loan, a low-interest loan, but here's some money to put into your business to keep your payroll going for those people who are forced to be at work, like people who are at our grocery stores, like Schnucks, Whole Foods, people who deliver groceries for those, Amazon, Instacart, et cetera. So I think if we're making sure that companies are solvent so that they can pay their employees, let's go. And it's a loan. I think outside of that, it has to, have all the strings attached where they can't be buying back their stock. They can't be giving out the golden parachutes to their upper, management or whatever when they decide to leave. So, I mean, whatever strings that we can, finesse on there, I'm probably for, especially as it goes to corporations.
I could be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, they were talking about letting the loan go, meaning even though they keep using the term loan, if I remember correctly, some of the industries were going to get that money where they could just not have to pay that money back. Not all of it was going to necessarily be a loan. And I have to be honest, I'm not even all that upset with that. Like if the government comes in and says, look, we don't want these industries to go belly up, fair enough. And if the government says, we're going to give these companies money as a loan, but if they follow certain protocols, we'll expunge the loan, meaning you don't have to pay this money back. Again, fair enough. But that has to come with concessions. I mean, this nationalization of these various companies, okay, maybe if you don't nationalize it, maybe you put workers on the boards. Meaning this is an opportunity, at least in my head, to actually get things done from the standpoint of the left, that the left priorities want. And I mean, one of the things Sanders put forth was having X number of people sitting on the boards of these various companies. Same thing with Jeremy Corbyn. Well, you can make that case the moment that these companies are coming to you for cash. They're begging for cash in order to maintain their existence, meaning they consider this to be an existential threat. Fair enough. If the roles were reversed and we were coming to a company for this, the company would try to maximize its profit at our expense. I think this is a perfect opportunity to try to get concessions from these various companies that would be in the best interest of workers. Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of that's going to happen. I don't know who you think is in the government that is actually there not because of these corporations. And that's the problem, right? I mean, as Nancy Pelosi said, the squad is like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of them. And that was a very derogatory and a very real thing she said. There is not a critical mass of people within the U.S. Congress that are thinking like you just proposed right there, Jamarl, of saying, yeah, let's hold these people over a barrel. The Democratic Party had Donald Trump over a barrel. They basically said the country will riot if you don't come up with a plan for free testing and you don't put a bill out there. We're not going to do anything until you actually give us some concessions on this thing, and that thing. And they simply didn't do any of that. They should have said, we were not going to support this unless you get rid of your Mexico wall funding. All of the wall, none of that's happening if you want free test kits. I mean, they did nothing whatsoever to pressure him because, again, these people are all bought by the same exact people. I do think you have a great point, though, when it comes to this is an opportunity to reorient and rethink what's happening in our communities. But it's also an ideal time to really take account of what is happening. I think about this a lot, about the checks trying to get to people or trying to get money to low-income people that don't have bank accounts. We even have an issue here where a lot of the people that do get subsidized checks or Social Security checks or Medicare and Medicaid, they use check cashing places that aren't your formal banks. Those are closed right now. The fast, like payday lending, a lot of those in our community are closed. Or you also have an issue where people are needing to send money abroad to other family members that live in other countries. And that is incredibly difficult to do as well right now. And so we're starting to really highlight. A lot of people obviously work in these spheres and know about these things, but we're all of a sudden have a much broader open. I mean, it's like the cut is wide open now. We're seeing it better than ever, and it's just showing the compounded nature of so many of these problems, Christine Hendricks. And that's what I'm really curious about: is how do we start addressing really, really intractable problems that we've been facing for a long time, and maybe now is that opportunity as things loosen up in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I think that's the point that our legislators should be using this as a time to kind of ask for certain things. Like I think Ayanna Pressley and Warren had been saying, hey, let's get rid of student loans. These are kind of ideas that we should keep pressing on and not wait for the next stimulus packet, but to have it in this one to really, like as you said, like reorient the way that our country is run. And as we can see, our economy hasn't been set up in order to ensure complete public safety during this time. And so we really need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we ensure that everyone makes it through an eventual pandemic, because this isn't going to be the only one. This is the first of maybe many more to come to see how can we, make our healthcare system stronger and either single payer or have that strong public option so that people are able to go to the doctor. Because I, for one, one of those people who am taking great risks to my own personal health by, making sure that people have food during this time, but I also don't have health insurance. And so how are we making sure that, people like myself who are, out in the community, making sure that people are fed, are able to take care of themselves and their families too. And it just seems as though our government has not been set up to allow for this. And if our elected officials aren't seeing this, and especially like the squad, people who have the history in the background and know what it's like to be out here on the ground, they should be the people that are out here really pushing that agenda.
Jamarl, I'm really curious from your perspective how that agenda does get pushed in this political moment of speaking up for the people. I mean, it just seems like after these senators last week dump all of this stock before they tell the American public what's happening, how are these people held to account? And I don't want to make light of the situation, but are we supposed to organize mass 6 foot apart rallies to the White House and Congress right now? Like, what is that mechanism? Because these people are basically still operating. They just dumped stock and they're still operating and making decisions of what other people money they should get now. Like, what?
Yeah, that's pretty astonishing. Richard Burr, what's the woman's name? Laufer, I believe. And her husband, who was like head of the stock exchange or something. All of these guys were like dumping stock after she got a meeting. In fact, she had the meeting and on that day dumped that stock. She was like, whoa, I got to get rid of the stock, man. This is going to be expensive. I guess the question is, what does accountability look like? Basically, I mean, is what you're asking. I don't know what accountability looks like in this context. I mean, this is so onerous that Burr and Laufer and even potentially Feinstein, even though Feinstein's one is a little bit more dubious. That one is not as clear cut. But those two were honors. Like, I have a hard time believing even the Republican Party backs them up on something like this. I mean, ultimately, these guys are going to try to get elected. They're in the middle of an election campaign. And I don't think you want to be the one out there sticking your neck saying, no, Burr was perfectly okay and getting rid of that stock. I don't think that's where you want to be. So, yeah, accountability will be meted out, I think.
Yeah, it is really interesting talking to different. And Christine, maybe let me ask you real quick before I do want to pivot and talk a little bit about the Department of Justice trying to put an indefinite state of habeas corpus, basically, policy guideline here in the United States. But I did want to ask you briefly there, you do work on Pastor Cori Bush is running for Congress. Is this everything we're in right now? Is this a conversation on all fronts from now until November?
I mean, I definitely, I think so. I mean, we definitely cannot predict the future, but I mean, just speaking about the campaign, it's really put a damper on the campaign because we're not able to be out knocking on doors, talking face to face with folks. But it is something that is on our mind. And the reason why Cori Bush is running is because people like myself who don't have health care, who should deserve health care as a right, right? And we can continue to push those kinds of messages, health care as a right, to ensure that, families are making the kind of money that they need in order to survive. Those are kind of issues that speak directly to what's going on with this pandemic. If people had those things already in place, we would have a situation where people would not, be needing to turn to different, community organizations like the schools or wherever to get food from, or people like myself who are collecting donations from people in the community. We would have those kind of things set up because that's the kind of America that Cori is going to be fighting for, the kind of America that Bernie is fighting for. And so hopefully people will begin to see that those are kinds of people that we need in office, and we can turn those into votes as well.
You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. here, 202-521-1320. You may be listening and watching on the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel. Please like us and subscribe there. You could be listening on one of the many podcast platforms you find us on as well, or you're on 105.5 FM, wherever you are. Thank you for listening. I did allude there to talking about another government agency beyond Congress making its own wish list these days. The Department of Justice has one too. The DOJ has asked Congress tomorrow to let them ask chief judges to detain people indefinitely during an emergency. Politico reported this on Saturday. One request was that Congress grant the Attorney General power to ask the chief judge of any district court to pause court proceedings whenever the district court is fully or partially closed by virtue of any natural disaster, civil disobedience, or other emergency situation. The ability to pause court proceedings would apply to any statutes or rules of procedure otherwise affecting pre-arrest, post-arrest, pre-trial, trial, and post-trial procedures in criminal and juvenile proceedings and civil process proceedings. The DOJ noted that individual judges can already pause proceedings during emergencies, but the new proposal would allow them to do it more consistently. A big red flag here is the pre-arrest and pre-trial parts. Now, every publication that has written about this has commented that the DOJ is very unlikely to get its wish list from the Democratic-controlled House, so we shouldn't look at this proposal as something that's imminent. But the clear disregard for the right of habeas corpus, that's the right to appear before a judge after one is arrested and argue for one's release, is scary, to say the least. The executive director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers told Politico, not only would it be a violation of that, but it says affecting pre-arrest. So that means you could be arrested and never brought before a judge until they decide that the emergency or civil disobedience is over. I find it absolutely terrifying, especially in the time of emergency, he goes on to say. We should be very careful about granting new powers to the government. The department also asked Congress to pause the statute of limitations for criminal investigations and civil proceedings during national emergencies and for 1 year following the end of the national emergency, according to draft legislative text. It also asked to change criminal procedure rules to allow more video conferencing and allow some video conference hearings to happen, apparently without defendants' consent. The draft proposal Politico saw had defendants' consent crossed out. That's right, they crossed out defendants' consent. But we have the right to public trials and to be present in court. The Justice Department asked Congress to pass a law saying immigrants who have COVID-19 can't qualify for asylum, so that's on the wish list as well. Christine, it's quite scary what the government will do in times of emergency. Amazing here, not surprising, I guess, but amazing to say the least, that Department of Justice head William Barr was able basically to kind of say, let's close the courts. If you're arrested, ticketed for anything, you could be thrown into jail without having the right to see a judge. And right now, it is a public health emergency to be in tight quarantines close to other people. There are calls around the country for more and more prisoners, and we've already seen this in LA, New York, and Cleveland, to actually release people from jail. And here you have the national government basically saying, oh, sure, go ahead and arrest people indefinitely and keep them in jail.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally not surprised. It kind of fits into what they're already doing. I've known people that have been arrested and held and had a hard time getting before a judge and all that. So this isn't anything that the government isn't already doing. They're already doing these things, and now they're just codifying it into law. That they're trying to codify it into law to be able to do these practices. In the light of day, I guess is the way to put it. It's super duper scary. I've heard even here locally that some people are saying that the unhoused are still being arrested, still being taken in. So it's sad to see that the federal government doesn't care about life. Doesn't care about people at the bottom, but this just fits into who they really are. So I can't say that I'm surprised.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised by that either. I mean, that's pretty bad. You would think that they would be trying to let people out as opposed to still trying to put people into the system. I'm curious, though. You know, for stuff like this, I always think that people and organizations don't like to give up power. And you made a point of saying they're trying to codify this in the law. Do you think that if this was a Democratic president, that they would be more inclined to go along with this? Meaning, if this was Obama, let's say not Trump, that was asking for these powers, do you think that they would be more inclined to say, yes, we're okay with him getting these powers? Meaning it's not a party thing. It's kind of like these are two wings of the same bird. It's only this kind of political opposition to it, not necessarily an ideological opposition to it. And to piggyback on that, if this did get passed, do you ever think they would get rid of it? Meaning, it's like a year after the crisis. Okay, but when does the crisis end? That type of stuff.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if it would have flew well with Obama because he's Obama. I think that black thing kind of would have worked against him. However, I do think some people in the Democratic Party who trusted Obama would trust Obama to enact such a rule because they trusted Obama to do other things that were not in line with the Constitution. So I do think that if the president or person in power has trust, I think people are more likely to go along with it. And I do believe that once it's enacted, it will be completely hard to get rid of it. And we've already seen that with the War Powers Act and everything that happened after 9/11. Those things were not rolled back, and a lot of that is still going on. So if we get it, we're not going to be able to get rid of it because no one likes to give up power.
Christine, I'm curious, as somebody that was involved there on the streets there around the Ferguson uprisings of 2014, what's it like to have a state of emergency in a city? What is it like to have the National Guard patrolling, setting curfews, moving people, maybe kind of foreshadow what potentially could escalate here in the United States? We've already talked about the increase of police presence in this city here, the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and the D.C. police and mayor have actually called for the support of the D.C. National Guard. I haven't seen any of the National Guard up in my neighborhood, but people down in Southeast, which is east of the Anacostia River of Washington, D.C., one of the last bastions of Black communities here in the district, heavily policed on a day-to-day. They have seen D.C. National Guards driving along the D.C. Maryland border. Tell us a little bit more about what those feel like, especially in Black and brown communities.
So it looks like tanks in the parking lot of your favorite grocery store. It looks like, young men and women that are not from your area, most likely. It looks like them stationed at corners, at grocery stores, at shopping plaza. It looks like, people at checkpoints. It looks like being pulled over and questioned because maybe you shouldn't be here. So I do understand that, some governors are calling for the National Guard to help with the medical aspect of it, or they're calling for the Army to help with the medical aspect of it, and that seems great. But when it comes to the policing aspect of it, that's when it gets a little crazy, and it'll just seem a little dystopian. Typically, though, the soldiers are less intrusive and mean than the police, at least that's here in St. Louis. I don't know about the rest of the country, but it's still definitely jarring to feel like your neighborhood is being occupied by military forces.
Do you think some of the conversations that are taking place right now has to do with that level of military occupation across the United States, like either with FEMA or basically the thought is if society starts to get worse, meaning something like Italy or something like Spain right now, but let's say on an order of magnitude worse, that the military would have to get involved, and the military going beyond just National Guard, talking about military itself on U.S. soil. That is so dystopian. I agree with you on that. I mean, how do you think society would view that? I mean, we have a certain way of looking at that stuff here in the United States. Is that something that you think this country will acquiesce to? Do you even think that they would even go that route or broach that? What would have to take place for something like that to come to reality?
I definitely think if we get to the level of panic, and not just panic, if we get to the level, and I mean numbers-wise, because Spain only has 62 million people, and they live a lot closer together than we do in the United States. So if this gets to, 1 million plus people in the United States, the numbers are starting to go up. I do think that that they will deploy the National Guard and the military. I think some people will actually call for it and want it. I think most of those people live in wealthy and privileged neighborhoods. I think those people are going to be the ones who are going to want and call for it and feel like it's necessary. I feel like people who live in, middle class or working class neighborhoods are the ones who are going to actually get the brunt force of it, if that makes sense. So I think that the wealthy people, most of them, they're going to want those that them and their assets in their homes versus us who live, in working class neighborhoods. We are going to just have a more police presence and probably greater oppression.
Christine, I was curious there. You're also just a few minutes left with you here. Thank you for joining us there from Missouri. Big question I have for you as the president of the University City School Board. What is the state of education right now? A lot of places are basically keeping the kids home and they're supposed to be doing distance learning. For me, I call it the end of the agrarian school calendar. It's an outdated model that our children take 3 months off in the middle of the summer. Maybe we're going to have school all this summer if schools are able to reopen, but a several-month closure, kids learning from afar. What are the long-term ripple effects on the education system in schools and states across the country from this?
Well, I'm actually crossing my fingers for positive things to happen to our education system. For one, in the state of Missouri, Desi has already told us that our students are not going to be taking those standardized tests, which is great. Standardized tests are actually worse on communities of color. They take funds out of schools with communities of color, so not having to take that standardized test is actually a plus. Learning from home, I think homeschool can be great. It gives parents an opportunity to interact more closely with their children on a regular basis. Our schools have online learning platforms already. We are set to issue out Chromebooks for children 3 through 5. I think that this is an opportunity to actually move on education and see that we can have differentiated ways of learning and how we can use technology to actually educate children where they are. So I'm looking at it kind of as a positive and to see like where we can actually move with education. I just want to say that Dr. Harden and the University City School District is doing an amazing job of making sure, like right now, I'm standing outside of Pershing Elementary where my children went to elementary school. We're handing out sack breakfasts and lunches to people, so we're making sure that our community is getting fed. So I think that the logistics of it is going pretty well. I think that we'll be able to see if online learning platforms can be great learning platforms for children. And so I think we'll have more data at the end of this year And you're right. We may see that children are going to be going to school during the summers. We may change the calendar. But I just think that right now it's a great time in education and government to really see and use technology to push the envelope and create different learning communities for our kids.
Jamarl, 30 seconds left here. I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts on what happens to education as somebody that's deeply invested in it yourself.
So education is one of those interesting things, right? I guess it depends on whether you believe things are going to change going forward or we're going to get back to some level of normality after this. We've reached a point technologically where education doesn't have to be done in the exact way that it's been done. I mean, we can clearly do this differently, but there's very rarely rethinks. So it's always just kind of these incremental changes. So I agree with the guests. I mean, I hope they do make adjustments to it going forward.
Well, let's take a quick break, Jamarl. I have some other silver linings that may be coming out of the coronavirus. It feels way too soon to talk about them, but hey, we're the political misfits. We are the ones that will bring those conversations up when no one else wants to. A big thank you to Christine Hendricks, the president of the University City School Board. Check out some of the great work she does to the Truth Telling Project and We Stay Woke podcast. Christine, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
With that, we'll turn to a break. We're back after this live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We are Political Misfits.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber here with Jamarl Thomas. Well, Jamarl, we're not together in the same place, but we're still able to share a laugh. You just sent us around. We're talking about this Joe Biden video that just went out a little bit ago here after we started our show with Where is Joe Biden? Well, we found Joe Biden, and maybe it would have been better to let him rest a little bit longer.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, because he's looking rough. I was sitting here laughing. I was sitting here thinking, I was like, oh my God, this Biden video is horrible. He's like moving his hands to tell people like his teleprompter breaks down or something.
And I thought he caught a good break with that last debate. It seemed like, oh, maybe if Joe Biden just can have a day to rest, then he can like recharge the batteries for a couple hours.
Not so
much. It seems like he had a whole week to rest. Maybe they overcharged him. And I don't know how charging 70-year-old men work. So I'm not exactly sure the mechanics on it, but whatever they did, it did not work, and he needs to go back into hiding immediately. You're listening to Political Misfits, 202-521-1320. I see, DJ, you're on the line. Let me first give a little rant here about some interesting things I've seen the last week, and things are bad. Let's first start with that. Our healthcare workers are under duress. They don't have enough materials or equipment, and if you're listening out there and you can donate money, support, or call your Congress member, the White House, whoever you can reach, demand we get more. We're also seeing bad things for those already living in poverty and those with long-term health issues. It's not a good week for those things, and it's clearly not a good thing for our economy, our mental well-being, or for the planet in many ways. But in the midst of this global pandemic, there are silver linings. And as important as it is to recognize the systemic failures this crisis is revealing, it's equally important to see where the crisis could possibly bring us. The stark nature of this can be seen in the photos of air pollution over China in the weeks before and after their country dramatically restricted the movement of their people. And there's more, Jamarl. Food production, consumption is down. While this isn't great for restaurant workers, and we surely don't want food to go to waste, Americans are ordering less and surely not wasting as much food in a time of crisis. And with all the restaurants closed in DC, they have started to offer excess meals and foods to impoverished communities. Famed DC restaurants like Little Sesame and the network of restaurants by celebrity chef Jose Andres are lending their expertise to making meals for seniors and families on fixed incomes and anyone else who needs a meal. Yes, in this national emergency, those in our community who need the most support and can actually get that support are eating the best meals in Washington, D.C. These are people that have lived in this city forever and have probably never had the income and access wealth to be able to afford these meals. And here they are in this moment getting those delivered. Another silver lining, Jamarl, those friendly skies above us are actually friendly. On average, in non-emergency times, the FAA oversees nearly 44,000 flights a day. Flight in America and across Europe is now at a standstill. Airplanes account for nearly 2% of all human global carbon emissions. And with airlines grounded around the world, our skies will become a little less polluted and a little friendlier. And what about in the world of policing? Well, on Friday night, I went for a late night bike ride and I asked several officers what they thought of the COVID-19 emergency and what, if any, orders they had from the chief of police. And that they told me basically, Jamarl, they were all extremely worried and wanted to make sure the chief knew that they did not want to enforce any low-level petty crimes or enforce social isolation. Jamarl, a police officer in a poor community of color actively avoiding low-level street harassment? What world are we living in? This is wild to me. I do want to note that it's incredibly scary that our society does not have enough people to respond to issues of domestic violence at this point. Jamarl, there was a story, just to cut myself off, about a fire in Washington, D.C., where two of the people that were in the home where the fire was were actually in quarantine for COVID-19. And so we have kind of this ethical dilemma now. Do firefighters or first responders rush into spaces to save people if they know the coronavirus is potentially there? So that is scary. On the other end, police basically saying we want to do hands-off policing and we're just here to observe. Another silver lining, New York City, LA, and Cleveland have released prisoners from their jails and prisons. People are getting freed from jail in America. What in this world? And Jamarl, sure, the U.S. is still aggressively sanctioning, murdering, and threatening even more things against Iran, but they did cancel what was one of the largest military drills ever conducted in Europe. So we got that one. And maybe more than anything, the shine of American exceptionalism has begun to show its rust. Americans are no more able to handle a pandemic than almost any other country in the world, and seeing how some countries have been able to flatten the curve, America is way behind. This government has been unable to meet the needs of its people. It is not oriented to respond to a crisis, oriented to build informal volunteer networks. It's unable to inspire a people into a common goal. America has shown its inability to care for those doing the most for humanity, failed to quickly shift economic resources to save lives, and it above all has reminded us that a government run by wealthy individuals and corporations is not exceptional. It is greedy, it is inhumane, and it is not a system I want to be a part of. The ultimate silver lining to all of this tomorrow will be a national awakening to this reality. Do you, Jamarl, think this will be a wake-up moment? Will these silver linings actually get talked about after the crisis is through its darkest days, or will we simply go back to sleep?
That's a good question, right? I mean, nothing like this has happened in my lifetime. And so I don't have any previous experience where I can kind of point to and be like, well, after X, this happened. I guess you can make an argument about the Great Depression. You can make an argument maybe about the Spanish flu. I mean, so there are certain parallels that you can kind of point to. But, you know, we're in this kind of odd environment where oftentimes we're not receptive to the larger things that go on. I mean, we had the crash in 2008. And you would think that there would have been action similar to what was taking place back during FDR. You had a Democrat in office. That Democrat ran on this kind of lefty message, and then they went in and effectively were just Republicans. So, you know, it's like, is there such deviation from the typical way we go about doing our affairs that people look back and say, hey, we didn't need that many people in prison? Or, hey, we could actually do something about homelessness. Or, hey, we could, send people a check for X amount of money to ensure to get rid of the worst aspects of poverty. We could do those things. Or do people just say, yep, that was just an emergency. Now we just keep on moving forward. I think part of it depends upon who is in the political system to make the argument, right? This is kind of like AOC saying we need to increase taxes on the wealth to 70%. And people were like, what? No, I can't believe she's saying that. And then you ask the public and the public is like, yeah, we agree with that. But if nobody brings it up, nobody, it's like it needs to be brought up just to even have this conversation and agreement. This is why I look at this. I think you mentioned this the other day about, do things change going forward? And it depends on who brings it up. If the argument starts to be made that, all right, yeah, these people want a handout, we need to get something for that handout, then I have a hard time understanding how the public hears that and be like, no, we need to pay those oligarchs off without getting anything in return. I think that would be a weird conversation. It really does depend on what arguments that are made now and whether or not they exceed beyond where we are.
It seems like my team here has taken an informal poll. They did vote that the firefighters should rush in regardless of whether or not people have coronavirus to save the lives. I'm going to throw my weight behind you guys as well and agree that firefighters and police in those emergencies will still need to do their jobs unless there is a replacement. I do believe we do have a caller on the line. I believe DJ has been waiting patiently for us. DJ, are you here with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
Thank you, DJ, for calling in. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, well, you had a caller, the one that was just in, and she made some points. Sorry to deviate. I love both of your shows. Jamarl, that's the reason why I'm watching right now, but you both are really awesome, and I appreciate what you do. Addressing the remark about President Obama, if he was one of the individuals that proposed to detain people indefinitely, he actually was an individual that was he wasn't an individual that was responsible, but the National Defense Authorization Act was carried out under the Obama administration, and it had a section which suspended the rights of citizens in 2012. So there was no due process, and they could indefinitely detain people. And this was done because they used a war on terror, that war on terror Trojan horse that was used to usher in that particular law. And I think that you both have really good points when you mention how our government uses emergency situations to cloak their attempts at the acquisition of power in spite of the risk of compromising their constitutional rights. In this particular case, or the Obama example, the NDAA was used domestically more than to thwart terror. Now, there were other things that were included in other amendments that were proposed, like the legal use of propaganda and the use of the government. They could monitor our lines with this act. So I think that there is a common theme is whenever there's something, a fearful situation that can take away from people's attention, then that's when these things start coming in to take our rights. And I just love how you both point that out. You were really amazing. And I just love your show, and that's what I was calling in to say.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I agree with you, right? I mean, the National Defense Authorization Act under Obama had made this argument. Chris Hedges, if I'm not mistaken, this took place after Occupy Wall Street, and it freaked them out. The argument that they were making was that they wanted to be able to use military on home soil if an emergency or in case of an emergency. I had forgot about that. Great call. Great call. Absolutely right.
Yeah, this stuff is quite terrifying, and it clearly shows that once the government gets a little, it'll take a lot. And it's also really interesting to me, Jamarl, it's times in crisis like this that you really kind of see the one-party system here in America run its course, right? I mean, you see them rallying around making sure corporations, big business are protected. You see them rallying around security measures and different defense measures around using the National Guard or shutting things down. And as much as there's a fight in an opposition a party allegedly, in these moments, you see how they seamlessly are able to work together on corporate bailouts as well as security increase. And I also think there's other conversations. I mean, we're seeing Israel right now using cell phones basically to track where people have the coronavirus, and a seemingly good way it would sound like to address a public health epidemic or pandemic. But at the other end, then when do they ever turn those off? Those are all great questions. We have a lot more questions to ask here on Political Misfits over the next hour. We're going to turn to a quick break before we come back with one of our favorites, Alan McLeod, and hopefully calls from you. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with Bob Schlehuber. We have lots to cover over the next hour, including the rather disconcerting news coming out of Europe regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we hop across the pond, let's get into some domestic politics regarding the COVID-19. As always, your calls and tweets are amply appreciated. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So I did a monologue last week, I believe, where I made the point that Donald Trump has botched the handling of this virus. Washington Post is reporting that the intelligence reports going back to January and February warned that the pandemic was coming. We could see the rather extreme actions China was taking to curtail the outbreak. We saw the spread into Europe and how ill-prepared they were in dealing with it. And now it has reached the shores of America. We lack test kits, ventilators, masks, medicines, and it should also be noted, our strong central government has ample powers to deal with an emergency like this. It requires political will and competence, but it could deal with the emergency. Unfortunately, this administration seems to be lacking both of those attributes. Also, we must understand that on a good day, the average American is barely making ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck without $500 in the bank to deal with an emergency. We don't have health care, little to no social safety net. We're not guaranteed sick leave. This is a recipe for disaster. We're in the midst of an election campaign for president. Now, I've argued that Donald Trump should beat Biden in this race, with one exception. The ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic are unpredictable, meaning how Trump handles this will, in many respects, be directly influential into who wins the race that is coming up, or for that matter, whether or not Biden is around and Biden is competent. After all, Biden has been missing for the last week, and when he finally did show himself, it didn't go all that well. Whereas Trump was rather passive and downplayed this in the beginning, something flipped, and almost like a light switch going off, Trump took this far more seriously, even to the point of outflanking Democrats, at the very least in public perception. Now Trump is talking about sending checks and pushing through policies that deal with the COVID-19. Here's the catch, though. Right now, we're waiting on the Defense Production Act. The Defense Production Act would allow U.S. businesses, or the president, to order U.S. businesses to produce the items that we need. This is something that Sanders has recommended. This is something that other people in Congress have recommended. Let's hear Trump talk about this. This is like yesterday. Let's hear Trump. Let's hear the clip of Trump dealing with the Defense Production Act.
Because we have so many companies making so many products, every product that you mentioned, plus ventilators and everything else. We have car companies without having to use the act. If we don't have to use specifically, we have the act to use in case we need it. But we have so many things being made right now by so many, they've just stepped up. In fact, Mike Pence and I were discussing it before. We've never seen anything like it, where they are volunteering. We want to make masks, like Hanes. I brought that up as an example. General Motors, I bring that up as another. Ford.
Market, sir, right?
They're going to go on the open market. We want them on the open market from the standpoint of pricing, because otherwise it's going to be, we could be very unfairly treated.
Direct them to the places in greatest need.
We are directing states, and sometimes we'll be competing against states, which I don't want, and we'll drop out of the bidding. We want the states to go first. And you know what we're doing is we're helping states. That's what we want to do. Same thing with the testing. We're helping states. We're helping states get to where they want. And we've made tremendous progress in every aspect of it.
This happens for a governor who needs equipment today.
Well, it's happening fast right now, and the governors are out there trying to get, and if they are competing with us, we immediately drop out, please.
Now, we are missing all sorts of items. And instead of marshaling the government to use the Defense Production Act to make those items, Trump just comes back with basically, yeah, we're not using that yet. That's no excuse for that. Trump has botched this. And yet, when you look at the polling, 55% of people approve of Donald Trump's handling of this crisis. That's utterly astonishing. We're joined today by Alan McLeod, author, journalist, and member of the Glasgow University Media Group, to discuss Trump public perception versus the reality of it. Alan, how's it going today?
Going well, Jamal. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We're hunkered down, but we're doing all right. So how weird is this? California has shut down. Ohio is on its way to shutting down. New York looks like a ghost town. There's pictures and images of hospitals literally overflooding with people to such an extent that people are laying on the floors. Trump's focus up to this point has either been to downplay it or to protect businesses, lying about our preparedness. And yet, his approval rating on this handling of the virus is at 55%. That is utterly astonishing. Do you think that if this gets to be as bad as Italy, that he's able to play politics with this to such a degree where he's able to maintain this approval rating?
Frankly, no. I mean, if the bodies start piling up, that's going to be a big counterweight to any of Trump's claims. I mean, for weeks he was saying that coronavirus is basically a liberal hoax made up to try to push him out of the White House. And we see this from the polls. You mentioned one. I saw one very recently. It was done between March 10th and 16th, so last week, and it said that barely a quarter of Fox News viewers thought the coronavirus was a significant problem to the country. And that is really worrying because we're living in a situation where we cannot really afford for once to have an incompetent commander-in-chief. We actually do need somebody who has a bit of leadership. And so far, the Trump administration has been sluggish, to say the least.
Yeah, sluggish is an understatement. I mean, especially if when you look at what's taking place in Europe, and you can see Europe has a social safety net. I mean, they have a universal health care, and even Europe was ill prepared in order to deal with it. You would have thought that Trump would have been a little bit more on it. Is this an issue of a person playing politics? Meaning, why do you think that approval rating is going up on this issue? Meaning, why don't they see it the way I see it? I look at it and thought, Trump has all sorts of powers at his disposal. Trump could have even did what they did in World War II, meaning, again, Defense Production Act, use the companies in the United States to start making the items, be it test kits, be it vaccine, whatever, to make those items that we need and ramp up production. He could have started that back in January or even to the latest February. He didn't do that. Meaning, as bad as he's been on this particular issue, why on earth are people giving him a pass on this to the tune where he gets over 50% in regards to approval for something that he has mishandled?
Yeah, right. I think in general, perceptions is more important than reality. Are the impact of the United States in terms of actual fatalities is, not extensive. It is a very large country. It's only had a relatively small amount of deaths. But the way that the American public is behaving is not self-isolating anywhere near the extent of, let's say, Italy, for example, is going to mean that in the next few weeks we're going to see huge numbers of fatalities. It's pretty much almost impossible to prevent that now. So I think in the coming weeks, we're going to see President Trump coming in for a bit more criticism. Although, frankly, a lot of people in the U.S. do live in their own worlds, which are dictated by the sort of media they consume. I don't really see Fox News turning on Trump just yet.
Yeah, for me, Jamarl, I think this is why I was kind of talking to you a little bit offline about the importance that the conversation has moved beyond just having a public health insurance. Because if your systems themselves aren't publicly oriented, you're going to have capitalism still intruding on these different spaces when it comes to the getting enough supplies and materials. You still need these different companies to actually produce life-saving, health-focused industry to get to a public health system whatsoever. And if you're seeing that kind of breakdown, you're going to see this tension. And that's why you really need to rethink the whole thing, not just the healthcare. I know in American politics, we kind of just pick away at one issue at a time, and we don't look at the interconnected nature of these different things. I think that's the other big issue that we need to keep an eye on over this moment. This isn't just a healthcare issue, but this is a whole societal issue. Alan, for me, it comes down just to simple education. Like the idea that people needed to be told for months while the coronavirus was outbreaking to wash their hands after they come in from being outside all day So basic health education in America or globally seems to be dramatically lacking in this moment. And then we have an undereducated populace on understanding what exactly it is a president does compared to what a Congress does, compared to anything else. And if they're just listening to Donald Trump and they're not exactly sure how the levers of power work, and Donald Trump says, hey, this wasn't me, this was China, I'm out here fighting for you guys, it seems like he can kind of just get away with that narrative.
Right. You know, I think we're collectively paying for, let's say, 4 decades of the state being whittled away and our resources being directed more and more towards the top 1%, towards big corporations who do what they want with it, which is not really in the public interest. What we've seen is countries with a much more collectivist spirit who've not bought into neoliberalism nearly as much, like, for instance, China, Cuba, and Vietnam, are actually getting control of the disease and sending lots of supplies all around the world. Cuba just sent hundreds of doctors to Italy and Jamaica and other countries affected by the virus. China is sending large amounts of medical aid. They seem to have flattened the curve properly and are perhaps on the downside right now. However, with the U.S., Trump, as you said, could be forcing large companies, big manufacturers, to mitigate some of the worst things that are going to happen. They should be producing ventilators. They should have been doing that weeks ago, frankly, because the Senate and Trump and all these committees knew what was coming, because we know that because they sold their stock, as we saw. So they knew that something big was coming, and yet they didn't prepare the population for it. And that is really one of the most damning things that's come out of this coronavirus scandal.
I agree with you.
Go ahead, Jamarl.
No, I was just saying. I agree with him. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is the response that the United States had in comparison to how bad this was. And I agree with you on another point. They were literally selling the stock, meaning they knew in advance what was coming. They knew to some degree how bad it was going to be. And they were still telling the public, there's nothing to see here, folks. Everything is okay. We're prepared. We're great. We're awesome. And then they went behind the scenes and sold the stock. That's utterly astonishing. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is grossly against the law. And to make your point, Bob, you said, how is there accountability in this? I suspect that once this is settled to some degree, there will be accountability. I just can't see them getting away with this. But do you, Alan, do you think that they're going to be able to slide on this?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I was saying, do you think they'll be able to slide on this? I mean, in the case of an emergency, it just seems so over the top that the public, I don't believe the public is going to accept that these guys were trying to get rich while everybody else was losing their jobs. That's what I'm asking. There has to be consequences for this, correct?
Well, you know, the best beyond decade, since at least the 90s, academic studies have shown, are those of senators. And the second best are those of Congress people, which clearly implies that there's all sorts of rigging going on. They are party to all sorts of insider information. So getting rich off of other people illegally is nothing new for politicians. But as we said, it depends really how bad it gets in the U.S. If the bodies do start piling up, there's going to be an enormous amount of public anger directed towards anyone who is seen to have been the cause of that. And I think that's really one of the reasons why we're seeing Trump and the Trumposphere in general trying to shift the blame towards China right now, you know, calling it the Chinese virus. Like Pompeo, the Secretary of State, saying, you know, China has to be held accountable for what they've done. This is really deflection tactics, because I think Trump is very often does actually have his finger on the pulse of some form of middle America. And I think they are sensing that there's going to be an awful lot of public anger coming up.
Yeah, for me, I just want to really amplify what you said there, Alan, here on Political Misfits Live in Washington, D.C. This 40 years of neoliberal policy that has shifted so much government money to corporations, from doing parking meters to planting trees to delivering food for our seniors and elders. The government has basically said, we are no longer going to do human social services directly to people, and we're instead going to pay corporations. Well, corporations are the worst place in the world that are focused on profits and not people. That is going to have to be addressed more than anything. I don't think it's just a simple conversation of oh, Donald Trump failed, but this longer conversation about how Donald Trump is a symptom of a much larger 40-year problem that both the Republican and the Democratic parties have played into. And Jamarl, this is where I think we get into the why is Bernie Sanders not hitting Biden on the head right now? Because it's not only Donald Trump and the GOP, it's also the Joe Bidens of the world that have led us into this mess. And that's why it's like, who is going to speak up on this issue? If Bernie Sanders has simply said, I'm not going to be the guy to point fingers at the Democratic establishment in this critical moment when it's been both of these parties that have left us in this situation, then who is, Jamarl?
Yeah, and that's my anger on that front for Sanders, right? I mean, for that exact reason. I mean, both of these parties are effectively two wings of the same bird. And you would think that if you're running with this notion that we're going to topple the system, that you should be able to point and say Joe Biden is the avatar of the billionaire class every bit as much as Donald Trump, and run with that. But like you said, nobody was willing to make that case. Alan, and just to still with Political Misfits, we're still joined by Alan McLeod, author, journalist, and member of the Glasgow University Media Group. My producer was telling me I massively misspelled that, or missaid that. But thank you for continue to join us. So let's hop across the pond for a bit. I've been following some of the stories that have been coming out of Europe, specifically Italy and specifically Spain. And they're clearly suffering through dire straits right now. You know, one of the things also that we need to understand here in the States is kind of what we've been talking about this hour, was that we're only a little bit behind Europe in regards to like Italy or Spain and some of the worst scenarios that they have there. There's a story, Alan, that's coming out that's rather shocking. So China sent 700,000 masks and ventilators to Italy to deal with the pandemic. The equipment was seized by the Czech. What? How does Europe allow a shipment to be taken by one of the other European nations as it's going to a European nation that's in dire need of it that much more? Can you explain the story to us? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, Italy is in a really dire circumstance right now. Over 600 died, I think 651 exactly. The country is in total lockdown. Spain is too. We've had the Chinese Red Cross flying over to Italy to try to instruct the government on how to effectively lock down the population a bit better. Frankly, the Chinese were dismayed by what they've seen, so the Italian case is probably going to get worse before it gets better. But China is actually one of the countries that is trying to provide a bit more of a positive role in this whole thing. So as you said, they've been sending a lot of equipment, masks, ventilators, even human medical professionals as well to Europe. As you said, when you've got this cargo coming through your country and it's supposed to go to another country, and you just say, hey, listen, just send all those masks to the next country, I can see how that can be for people to say, we need these, and should we really be sending them there? That's clearly going to cause a whole lot of strife between the countries of the European Union if this sort of thing continues.
I mean, it's pretty amazing that they did that. What is Europe doing? Meaning, right now in the United States, one of the most interesting things I've always thought about Europe was, whereas we have states, and these states for the most part, you know, I'm not a big fan of Texas. However, if anything happened in Texas, wouldn't occur to me not to have all of the powers at our disposal from the context of the country to go to help Texas. But Europe is full of countries. These aren't states. These are their own countries with their own histories and everything else. How has Europe coordinated the response to the various places? Because each place, like you say, Italy, Spain, these countries are hit harder than some of the other countries. How has Europe prioritized getting the supplies and the resources to the various countries that are needed in the context of other countries that may not need them as much?
Yeah, well, frankly, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. They're not really coordinating very well. There is no real harmonized. Countries like Spain and Italy are in total lockdown. The United Kingdom only shut its pubs and restaurants a couple of days ago at the weekend. So we are on total different spectrums of what's going on here. And there hasn't really been a unified approach where the European Union will direct funds and resources to certain member states that are doing worse than others, for instance. I think the problem with that is because it is not actually a proper union like the United States, where it's one centralized government. The European government has always been somewhat weak. It's always been reliant on the individual goodwill of certain countries. But in tough times, economic downturns, and of course the pandemic we're in, we are seeing certain countries starting to shut up shop and try to provide for themselves before they provide to other countries. And this is going to put a big strain on the EU, I think.
I'm curious, because you made a really good point that this was basically a trading bloc, meaning the European Union started off as just a zone where they traded various items, almost like a trading cartel of sorts. So you're saying they're not strong enough to accommodate, or they don't have powers necessary, kind of like where the U.S. is a strong central government. The EU doesn't really have that per se, so they weren't able to coordinate the response. Is this going to, I'm curious, do you think this is going to put pressure on Europe in the sense of like a Brexit for other countries, where other countries are talking about leaving, or do you think that they try to put through measures that tighten the bond in Europe to allow the powers necessary for it to accommodate the virus, the pandemic?
Well, in response to that, I think anybody who says that they predicted everything that's going on with COVID-19 is not telling the truth. The thing is that the situation seems to change from day to day. We see politicians suddenly embracing things like universal basic income or nationalization of key industries that would just never be thought of even 2 weeks ago. So I don't really want to put a prediction on, whether this is going to start cracking the EU. But certainly in Europe, the European Union is not the same as like the United States government, where they do not have the resources to marshal funds. Power still largely lies in the country's capitals like Berlin, Madrid, Paris, London, etc. They're really the ones that are taking their countries in whatever direction they see fit, frankly. So what's going to happen with Europe is very difficult to say, frankly.
Yeah, and the other thing they'll have to figure out one way or another is then how do you start to restrict if again, we're able to get past this virus, and right now, who knows how long that will be and what that looks like. But what we've seen out of China is that they've been able to stop almost all localized spread, but the virus continues to be brought back into the country from outside of the country, and that itself could trigger new endemics constantly. And so basically, Alan, you're saying at some point, UK, Italy, Spain, hopefully is able to start reopening its borders, but then how do you actually have border checks for people's health conditions before they enter into your country? It just seems like a long, long period of isolation. And to get to Jamarl's point, the more countries are isolated and having to fend for themselves, how quickly they'll forget about others who may have helped them in the past.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like we're going to be playing cat and mouse with this illness for a very long time. Frankly, I only see two options. It's either that we do develop herd immunity, as the Prime Minister of the UK said, where that really does entail the large majority of the population getting the disease. That's clearly not a good option. Or we're simply trying to halt the spread of it until we buy time to try and develop a vaccine or find some drugs that actually are really effective against it. And apart from that, I don't really see another way forward.
How does Europe deal with this going forward?
Jamarl.
Right? Well, I was going to ask, going forward, long term. I mean, if the United States is dealing with financial and economic repercussions, what about Europe? I mean, we're talking about major economies effectively being taken down. And I know some of the governments have started taking action on, guaranteeing income so that the employees, I think the UK has started doing this, guarantee a certain amount of income that's going to go back to the various people. How does Europe deal with this going forward, though, state to state? Like you said, many of these states are not balling. Many of them are in debt. France, Italy, these countries were in debt before on the best of occasions. And now after this, there's probably going to be large expenditures to deal with it. What does Europe look like in 3 months or 4 months dealing with this particular illness?
That is a real question. Yeah, so in the UK, our guaranteed 80% of our wages. at this point, we are looking at a pandemic where we just have to say, listen, the economy is completely toast. We now have to start thinking about fighting for people's lives and the society rather than the economy, and we'll pick up the pieces later. But here's another problem, especially for those countries in the Eurozone. They do not have the power of the printing press. They cannot print money like the United States did last week, where Donald Trump just fires in $1.5 trillion into the economy to help the stock market, or, you know, could just send out a check for X amount of dollars every month to all the citizens. If you're a country like the Czech Republic that is relatively small, relatively poor, relatively in debt, you can't really do something like this because you are using the euro, and the euro is essentially controlled by the richer, larger countries like Germany to their ends. That's a huge problem going forward, that you are not in control of your own monetary supply, because you can't enact all of these stimulus packages that we've been talking about. So there's going to have to be some sort of either complex negotiation across Europe, or there are going to be huge fractures within the continent.
Yeah, and for me, Jamal, I think of countries like Czech all of a sudden, and they don't have the economic well-being, might start confiscating shipments. I also really see the interesting. I'm curious what Alan had you spoke to about this kind of cat and mouse game, and for me, the image that comes to mind when I think of the future of the coronavirus, if it is able to be at least contained from mass spreading across the globe, I think a lot about the Grenfell Tower, of just kind of one-off isolated points that a large building will all of a sudden be hit of seniors or something. You'll have hundreds dead in certain spots, or you'll have a small town like New Rochelle, New York, which was one of the epicenters there in the state of New York, have these little breakouts. And that's what's really terrifying to me, that obviously the wealthiest of the wealthy overwhelmingly will be fine and not affected by this. I'm sure a celebrity or two will make it onto the list of having died from the coronavirus, but the masses of wealthy people are going to be able to weather this. But it is going to be one-off, small, pocketed outbreaks of the virus until there is a vaccination, if that is possible, and it doesn't mutate into other forms. But again, it's going to be about who gets hit the hardest. And you mentioned countries like the Czech and other impoverished or financially stricken economies like there in Spain or Greece or others who aren't able just to rapidly flood their economies. And that, to me, is quite terrifying, Jamarl.
That is terrifying. I mean, we have control of our currency, basically. I mean, if we needed to print dollars, we can print dollars. Well, like you said, in the Eurozone, they don't have that control. And so how are they accommodating this then? Like, so what is Italy doing, or what is Spain doing in order to accommodate the increase in the revenue that they're going to have to, I mean, they're going to have to put out money. I mean, I don't know how they get around that, either sending checks to people, either stopping rent controls, evictions, all of these things look like they will have to be done. If they don't have control of the printing press, how are each individual country dealing with it?
Well, I mean, in terms of France, they've also done the same thing where they're guaranteeing a certain amount of income to workers. They're guaranteeing businesses will be given loans. But yes, as you said, it's difficult to see how that's going to mesh with their monetary theory. However, what I would say is that in the past few weeks, we've seen things that we were told were completely economically impossible for decades. Things about social housing, things about ending homelessness, universal basic income. All of these things have been thrown out the window. People's ideologies have been torn up, and they've completely changed into what some people would call socialists, this big government spending, government controlling everything, essentially nationalizing key businesses. But yeah, going forward, it's going to be the people at the bottom of society who are mostly hit by this. It's going to be elderly people, poor people, homeless people especially are in a real predicament. And it's also going to be people who are in those jobs that are often called unskilled or low-wage jobs that are suddenly absolutely necessary to keeping the society afloat. People who work for Amazon, postal workers, people who stack shelves in Walmart, etc. These are actually the people that are keeping society going, not the people in Manhattan making $200,000, $500,000 a year working in an office trading derivatives.
Alan McLeod, thank you so much for joining us. Alan is an author, journalist, and member of the Glasgow University Media Group. Alan, best of luck over there in the UK.
Yeah, stay safe, guys. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. With that, we'll turn to a commercial. Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. It's time for maybe my favorite weekly segment, Miss the Press, looking at the worst questions, interviews, and interactions on America's Sunday morning political talk shows. I'm Bob Schlaber, joined by Jamarl Thomas from a safe distance. Give us a call at 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320 to join the conversation. Well, we turn to Miss the Press. The big news across the board and all the Sunday talk shows was what Democratic Party presidential frontrunner Joe Biden had to say on each of these programs. Let me play first here what Joe Biden had to say on Meet the Press. Okay, great. That was Joe Biden on Meet the Press. Here now is Joe Biden on Face the Nation. And Joe Biden here on This Week. Here's tomorrow. This isn't funny. This is what the future president has to say in the height of a national emergency. Here is Joe Biden on This Week. Yep, you guessed it. That's right. Joe Biden was not on any of those Sunday morning talk shows, nor was he on State of the Union or Fox News Sunday. Jamarl.
That was the most coherent I've ever heard Joe Biden, Bob.
Joe Biden, the man, the myth, the legend, the former lifeguard, South African political prisoner, candidate of the billionaires, is nowhere to be found. Well, allegedly, we found him somewhere there about an hour before our show started. But how is he not? I mean, how is that? That's got to be the takeaway from this weekend is Joe Biden went on none of the Sunday morning talk shows, and nobody was like, hey, Joe Biden's not here. This is remarkable. You're begging for candidate time on any of these shows in any other circumstance. You're ready to go fight a national emergency. You should take over the country. Donald Trump is failing. You're saying, I'm going to replace the guy. I should beat the guy. But in a moment where you basically can become the de facto president, this is why Obama was talking when the economy was collapsing. Barack Obama was having high-level conversations before he got into the Oval Office to talk about what needs to be done if his administration was to take over. You would think Joe Biden would be doing the same type of conversations. Who is he talking with? Well, he's surely not talking with the American public, and that's got to be quite concerning.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's just bizarre. I mean, you're in the middle of an economic downturn. You're in the middle of a pandemic. And like you made the point before, when Obama was running and the economy was, falling apart, Obama was everywhere. Like, every time you turn the television on, Obama was there with Bush. He was there talking to financial people. And even think back to 2012 when you had the hurricane and Chris Christie and Obama was out there, like doing bros, with Obama doing the president and Chris Christie doing governing. And, many people thought Mitt Romney had a really good chance of winning that race. And some people even go so far as to credit that action with him looking presidential in the middle of a crisis as the thing that put him over the top. So, yeah.
That hug, the good old hug from Chris Christie at the height of the Hurricane Sandy is what really wanted. That's what put Barack Obama in the White House. That's the story Chris Christie told me, at least. So I'm going to stick to it. Let's get to some actual clips of what were said this weekend here on Political Misfits. We're talking about Meet the Press. The very unable Chuck Todd was interviewing FEMA Administrator Peter Gaynor about the usage of the 1950s Defense Production Act. The act, as you surely know, would allow for the government to direct private business to make certain supplies. Let's listen to this clip about the state of that act potentially being used. Here's Chuck Todd asking the question of FEMA Administrator Peter Gaynor.
Defense Production Act, we know the president invoked it. Is it being used or not? Or are you wanting companies to voluntarily pitch in here, and you're only going to use it if they don't voluntarily pitch in?
Yeah, so I think it's an insurance policy, right? It's a lever.
Jamarl, he basically just said, yeah, corporations will just volunteer for this stuff, right? Does Chuck Todd really think that the owners there of Meet the Press at Comcast and all of their military industrial complex ad buyers on those commercials are just going to voluntarily chip in their services right now and not be concerned whatsoever about profit?
It's a ludicrous perspective, right? I mean, everybody, look, companies function on profit. That's their job. That's what they get up in the morning to do. That's what they go to bed at night doing. And the president, that rule, that Defense Production Act is there for that very specific reason, because they understand that companies are there for profits, even if it's in wartime. And you had plenty of companies that got rich backing up the Nazis during World War II. Companies exist for profit. This question from Chuck Todd is absurd.
Yeah, and then Gaynor's answer basically, well, it's an insurance policy. It's a lever. If we have to use the like, if things rise to the state, I don't know, like if it's a national emergency, maybe we'll. It's like, wait, we're in a national emergency. Like, at what point do you pull the lever when there's about 1 million some people that are about to have this virus that they're not able to pass, they're not able to recover from? When is that insurance policy get cashed in? And he basically says, well, we haven't used it yet. Will we use it? Maybe.
That should have been used like in January. Okay. Honestly, that should have been started in like January. I mean, masks, ventilators, all of these things that we don't. And you know, the sad part, Trump has been running around screaming America first. And if nothing else, you talk about a silver lining, to have production ramp up on your home soil with all of these items that you couldn't necessarily pull in from the other countries. This would have been a perfect opportunity for that quote unquote America first stuff.
Yeah, and if people are looking for that act to actually be used, Donald Trump said of it, quote, "We are a country not based on nationalizing our business. Call a person over in Venezuela. How did nationalization of their business work out? Not too well." So if you're turning your eyes toward the National Defense Production Act as a potential saving grace for General Motors and the great Boeings and Raytheons to turn their missiles into face masks for doctors, I wouldn't hold your breath, and I wouldn't recommend anybody holding their breath right now with the coronavirus out and about attacking logs. Jamarl, there's one more clip here I wanted to play from the Sunday news circuit. This clip here is of Fox News Sunday host John Roberts asking Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Steve Mnuchin, sorry, I got that one wrong there, on the state of the U.S. economy. Here is that clip from Fox News Sunday.
Are we currently, Mr. Secretary, in a recession?
I think that's a technical question that in this situation is not terribly relevant. You know, are we going to have reduced economic activity this quarter? Absolutely. I think next quarter a lot depends on how quickly the curve of the medical situation works. But, you know, when people focus on recessions, it's normally because of a prolonged economic environment. This is a very unique situation that we've never had before. This is the government has self-imposed shutting down large parts of the economy. And as soon as we can get the medical situation under control, we're going to reopen it. And to the extent we've kept all these small businesses in business, we've kept workers with them, when we reopen the economy is going to bounce back significantly.
Medical condition, Jamarl. When we get past this just slight inconvenience of a medical situation we find ourselves in, the economy will be back and well. Yeah, maybe it's not a recession. A recession kind of sounds like a long-term illness you've been battling for years on end. This is like if your heart stopped beating and the government had to take a defibrillator to wake it back up. That's the situation we're dealing with. Oh, this minor inconvenience to our economy. Just give us a few weeks, and once we open back up everything, we'll be back and running before you even. I mean, what?
Yeah, the honest answer to that question is yes. It's a recession. I mean, it's almost by definition.
For a while.
He's like, that's a technical thing. That's not a technical thing at all. That's a real. Hey, you have all these people losing their jobs. You have, like they said, shutting down large segments of the economy. California is our most populous state. To put it in perspective, Hillary Clinton got more than 3 million votes out of California by itself, meaning the total that Hillary Clinton always brags about came almost directly from California. That state has been shut down. Like, put that in perspective. New York, number 2, will be behind it. Like, this is clearly a recession. And I don't even buy this nonsense that everything was great before the coronavirus. I mean, they were dropping tons of money, like billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into the markets. Trump was running around browbeating Powell, the Fed chair. I mean, these aren't things that people do when the economy is going awesome. They're not.
Well, yeah. And I think Mnuchin was basically trying to go off the whole technical definition that it's back-to-back quarters of decline. Well, I can promise you're going to have a few back-to-back quarters of decline here, and then does it become a depression at some point is the other question. But for him to spin it that way, a medical situation, I thought was quite rich. I want to slide in a few callers here within our Miss the Press segment. We do have Lois and Allie have been waiting on the line. Lois, I think you're still with us. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm fine. I'm at home, and if I could direct the economical situation, the recession is in remission. You know, it's a real cancer that's in remission, and I say this as a respiratory therapist, and I'm not sure how many of us you've heard from, but that's the primary reason I was calling.
So tell us a little bit about how the respiratory system works in relation to this virus, and what are some simple ways people can protect and keep their lungs strong. If maybe that's what you were going with, but and add anything else you wanted to say.
Well, wait. Also, could you get into what your experiences have been working as a respiratory technician in the middle of this? I mean, I would imagine if you're either at a hospital, if you're working somewhere, you're one of our frontline people. What have you been experiencing with this?
I can only tell you, Jamarl, as somebody who has 44 years in the experience of being a critical care therapist in ICUs and initiating and managing mechanical ventilation. And so my experience is based in the past. I quit using my skills this last June. I retired, and I guess I'm lucky because there are 150,000 respiratory therapists in this nation, the United States. And our demographics, a lot of us were highly skilled, trained, the most excellent training only began in the mid-1970s. So a lot of us who are boomers, who are retiring now, we are looking at an aging field of RTs, of respiratory therapists, right along with nursing. Nursing is an aging field as well. And so that were I working today, I can pretty much paint the description for you. It's pretty similar to an article I was reading where an RT who works in New Orleans, of all places, was faced with a tripling of the number of patients coming into the ICU who required mechanical ventilation. The respiratory system fails due to the organism coming into the lungs, and usually you get dysfunction by two methods. You either are inflamed by something like bad asthma or bronchitis, sometimes COPD, or an infectious agent, which, you know, if you have a viral pneumonia, that pretty much distributes itself all across your lungs. With this particular organism, what happens is the inability, because of the severe inflammation, of making that air mechanically move in and out, and thereby you're looking at somebody, normally when you have this, it's called adult respiratory distress syndrome. Normally, this is something over a period of 48 hours that presents itself so that you say, you know what, we're going to have to intubate this patient and manage his respiratory system. And this is something that if you were reading that article that was written by the RT who was in New Orleans, this was happening in a matter of less than a day. So they were tripling the number of beds and patients that they needed ventilators for. The kinds of things that people continue to need to do is stay home so that they do not present themselves into the healthcare system. And that means you wash your damn hands and you keep yourself clean. And when you go out to the store to get anything, you wear gloves, you sequester, you keep your mouth shut, you keep an equal distance of a meter away from people you're walking around with, pay for your groceries and go home. And if you are 50 years of age or over, you damn well make sure you stay there until you need to absolutely go out for something else. That's the best you can do currently. But if you are one of the 150,000 RTs out there, you are overloaded, probably not in great shape yourself because of your age bracket, and totally unsupplied, which is the thing that infuriates me the most about this 1950s legislation that we have on the books. We can tool up facilities that would produce 95 masks, and certainly we could take equipment that has been used for decades and bring the old ventilators back into the ICUs that maybe some of us oldsters know about, but certainly we do have the ability to act quickly, but Trump can't even do that. They can't even stand that.
Yeah, I hear you, Lois. Thank you so much for your call, your insights. Please call us back daily, regularly, whenever you feel comfortable and want to give us updates. They're greatly, greatly appreciated. Quite shocking what's happening across the country as this coronavirus continues to grapple and gain our attention. And I think about the underpreparedness of our military soldiers that we sent into war without proper armored vehicles and other incidences. This nation that talks so much about how it cares so much about the soldiers they send out to fight for war doesn't equip them properly, and they talk so much about the nurses and doctors that save the lives, and they worship them as heroes. But at a moment when they need help more than ever, they're the first ones to be abandoned. I do want to slide in one other call here. Allie, I know you've been on the line patiently waiting as well. You're also now on Political Misfits. What's on your mind today?
Hey, what's up, guys? I've called in a few times as Anthony from out of Detroit before.
Anthony, what's happening, man? How you feeling today? It's always nice to hear your voice again. If I knew it was you, you would have got a much welcomer welcome. But thank you for calling in.
Oh, you're all good. You're all good. Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it out of my house. I've got a grandmother with prior respiratory issues, so really trying to keep it out of my house. I just had two quick comments on. First one about last week, there were, I believe, two callers, one a Latino male and the other a black male, that were like very, the Latino male, I don't know if he was even ever pro-Bernie, but they were very, much in support of Bernie's general platform. But at the end of the day, they were kind of shilling you got to go ahead and vote, vote for Biden at this point. Argument. And I guess I just wanted to comment on that I understand the disillusionment with the system and even resentment towards Bernie Sanders as an individual for his tactics in this race in particular. And I mean, Jamarl, I think you expressed a lot of that pretty eloquently and fluidly. And Bob, I even give it to you for critiquing him. But at the end of the day, I don't understand the lack of support, and I definitely don't understand, the going the whole opposite direction of putting forward the guy who completely does. If you took an honest perspective, it would be laughable to suggest that you actually believe he's going to get us anywhere as far as human rights, civil rights, anything on the board. So yeah, that's my first question or my first comment. If I have time to make one other quick one, then I could go ahead and throw that in there.
I'll give you 15 seconds on a second one. Go for it.
Cool. Yeah, just I don't know if you guys saw about the stock markets. Those senators that got their money out of the stocks when they got that information after that meeting. There was the female, her name starts with an L. The Republican female. She was on Fox News, and I'm just looking for clarification because She legislation. So you probably heard. It sounds like you probably heard that. She said there's legislation that already takes care of that, and yada yada. And basically, from what she said, I mean, if it's true, it makes what you guys are saying in like media in general more or less slandering them. If what she said is true, but yeah, just looking for clarification on that.
Yeah, a lot to be said there, and I think the point is a lot of those media personalities were probably friends with these people. These people probably tipped off one another, tipped off other people around them, and we show the complicity again between the different systems of media and government. And I completely agree with you. I'm somebody that's not a blue, no matter who kind of person. I understand the difficulties and challenges of building a new national party to try to take on the forces to the right, and I understand that that's not an easy task, but unless you're the first one to kind of step out there and do it, it's never going to happen. Jamarl, let's take a quick break. We can get back into the rest. I know you have a lot of thoughts on everything that was mentioned there. Let's close out our weekly Miss the Press segment and turn to a break. As always, at the end of our Miss the Press segment, it's a good reminder here for all of you guys.
You check tab.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world.
From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea, from Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaver, here kind of with Jamarl Thomas. He joins me by Skype as we are both observing our national pandemic call to stay at home. There's a short bit left with you all here today. We wanted to fit in a couple more stories to make sure we didn't leave anything out. Like Bloomberg, Jamarl still in the news just for a little bit longer, and he might be out of it pretty quickly with this latest move. Bloomberg's defunct presidential campaign laid off hundreds more staffers Friday as he announced that he's folding his massive battleground operation into the Democratic National Committee. Yep, you heard that right. The billionaire hero of the left that we all cleared space for up on that debate stage, who was going to bankroll all of his staffers until November, just laid off hundreds of those staffers. Nixed his plans to bankroll a PAC as well, and now has given a measly $18 million. $18 million to the DNC, Jamarl. He could easily give $18 billion if he wanted to, but he went with the slightly smaller amount, $18 billion. Someone please get me on the phone all those Democratic sellouts across the country. I want to have a good laugh in their face.
Well, not just them, right? I mean, even the people who work for his campaign. I mean, a lot of those people were working for him purely for the cash. And you're like, so wait, you're backing a guy who you accept as an oligarch buying the race. You don't particularly like the guy, but you're still going to work for him anyway with the potential for getting this guy over the finish line.
And I mean, again, people got bills to pay. I get it. People need work in this country. So I'm going to be the last one to tell somebody to turn down a job. But one of the big parts that they were saying that incentivized them to take some of these contracts was that Bloomberg was going to pay them through November.
Yeah.
This is why I can't trust billionaires. And Jamarl, that measly $18 million donation comes on the heels of the latest Federal Election Commission filing made on Friday, which showed that Michael Bloomberg spent more than $900 million on his failed bid at the White House by the end of February. So those math nerds out there doing the math.
That's so much money. God, that's so much money.
Bloomberg just gave, in comparison, Bloomberg just gave 2% of what he gave himself to run his race to the entire Democratic National Committee. So the DNC basically said, we have to let the guy in. He's got all the money. If we let him in, he'll cover us. And they get 2% as a national organizing committee than what Bloomberg was willing to give himself. The FCC report, the FEC report shows that Bloomberg poured more than $500 million into television advertising, $100 million on digital ads during his roughly 100-day campaign. He paid more than $15 million for polling. He directed $45 million to Hawkfish LLC, a private digital firm he owned and created before he entered the race. More than $30 million was spent on direct mail. So yes, $30 million. That's $12 million more on direct mail for Bloomberg than he gave the entire DNC. And he spent more than $1 million on meals for his staff that swelled to more than 2,000 people in a few short months. And today, when those staffers need the meals more than ever, Bloomberg lays them off. Jamarl, that wasn't the only big financial story coming out of this latest FE filing. One Elizabeth Warren, we learned a little bit more from her failed campaign as well.
Yeah, super PAC. Effectively, all of that money that Elizabeth Warren got from that super PAC came almost predominantly from one person, Carla Juriston. This is basically an oligarch that had also given money to like Emily's List. And if I'm not mistaken, even Joe Arpaio, so these were this was a person who was literally almost entirely funding the super PAC for one Elizabeth Warren. Also, one other point for the Bloomberg thing. Bloomberg is turning over his offices and everything else to the Democratic Party. But he's also, because he ran in the race, he can funnel as much money as he wants to the DNC, meaning that even though he's at 18 million now, if I'm not mistaken, he hasn't closed up shop, he's just suspended the campaign, he could still funnel the party a lot more cash. So, also we need to understand, like I kept saying, from day one, Bloomberg was only in the race to stop Sanders. He didn't care if another Democrat was going to win it, meaning Bloomberg had no issue if Joe Biden was going to take it. Bloomberg just didn't want Sanders to take it. That was the only reason he got into the race. So the moment where it looks like Biden is going to win it, Bloomberg has no incentive at all to do anything else. If Trump wins, Bloomberg's still going to get his tax cuts and everything else. If Biden wins, Bloomberg's still going to get his tax cuts and everything else. Bloomberg has no loss in this situation anymore. This is a win-win for Bloomberg. So he has no reason to continue to give the party any additional cash.
Yeah, it is really, what do you think the DNC is saying right now? Do you think that Bloomberg even played the DNC? Because the DNC was saying, look, this guy has the money. He's going to funnel money into all these different programs across the country. Maybe he said basically, look, guys, whatever I raise and I have left over, if I don't win, you got it. And now he's basically saying, here's some chump change on the way out. I'm actually going to close up shop. And we talked about this a lot tomorrow. A lot of the people he was able to hire, and a lot of people we talked about were basically working for Bloomberg but campaigning for other candidates while they were out there. Yeah. Bloomberg was able to poach them because he was able to offer much more money. And down ballot, Bloomberg took a lot of skilled time from a lot of staffers that could have been working on down ballot races. And so basically he said, look, I'm going to cover and pay all of them and pull their resources. And now he has all of these people scrambling. It is really, really hard to raise money for a political campaign right now. And so all these other candidates running for office that are still in the race who could use that financial support from Bloomberg, one, aren't going to get it. And two, they're not going to have it to actually hire these staffers that they would have months ago to even run their campaign.
And let's put it in context. Bloomberg has like $60 billion. He just spent nearly $1 billion on a vanity project. This is like a rounding error from the standpoint of his finances. Bloomberg could have paid all of these people from the entire time, meaning he could have still paid these people for the operation that he was running in. He didn't, this wouldn't have injured him all that dramatically at all. He could have said, look, I want to make you guys whole, so I'm just going to pay you out for the year. Like I said, I was going to pay you before, and called it a day. But he didn't want to do that. He was like, no, I can't believe I spent nearly $1 billion, man. I don't have any additional funds to pay these people who I said I was going to cover for the end of the year.
Yeah,
Sad.
I like that you said it was a rounding error. He doesn't use TurboTax, Jamarl, so Michael Bloomberg has no rounding errors. He has a lot of CPAs spending months on end because his finances are complicated. Yeah, what a joke of a guy. I am glad that this will be the lasting memory of Michael Bloomberg's political career until he runs for office 3 years from now, like he surely will. Well, Jamarl, we made it through a start of another week. We thank our listeners for sticking with us in this untraditional format. It's greatly appreciated. We greatly appreciate Lois, Anthony, and everyone else that called in. Big thank you to our guests today, Alan McLeod and Christine Hendricks. A big thank you to Michelle Whitty for producing the show, and our engineers, Philip, Andre, Saul, who is on vacation but still working hard. and Ryan in the booth there. Big shout out to all of you guys. Thank you again to our listeners. You've been listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. Now get back to organizing.